There is a particular kind of pain that few people speak about openly, not the pain of rejection alone, not the pain of loss, but the pain of giving everything you had and still feeling unchosen. It is a quiet ache, a silent question that lingers long after the conversations have ended, long after the doors have closed, long after the person, the opportunity, or the dream has moved on without you. You sit alone with a feeling that is difficult to explain. You loved deeply, you tried sincerely, you showed up consistently. You carried more than your share, and yet somehow, despite all of that, someone else was chosen. Something else was chosen. A different path was chosen, and you are left standing in the ruins of effort, wondering whether everything you gave was ever enough. Many of us spend years haunted by that question, because beneath the disappointment lies something even deeper. The fear that if we were truly valuable, truly worthy, truly lovable, we would have been chosen. And so the mind begins its endless investigation. What did I do wrong? What should I have said? What should I have become? What part of me was missing? The human mind is remarkable in its ability to search for answers, but it is equally remarkable in its ability to create suffering when answers cannot be found. The tragedy is that many people spend years trying to solve a mystery that was never theirs to solve. Because being unchosen does not always mean being inadequate. Sometimes it simply means being mismatched. A rose is not rejected by the ocean because it lacks beauty. The ocean simply cannot become a garden. Yet when we are emotionally wounded, we rarely see life this way. We personalize everything. We turn circumstances into verdicts. We transform outcomes into identities. A relationship ends, and we begin believing we are unlovable. A dream collapses, and we begin believing we are incapable. A door closes, and we begin believing we are unworthy. But life does not hand out conclusions so easily. Human beings often mistake events for truths, and there is a profound difference between the two. Imagine a traveler carrying a lantern through a dense forest at night. The light only reaches a few feet ahead. The traveler cannot see the entire landscape, cannot see the mountains beyond the trees, cannot see the rivers that curve around unseen paths, cannot see where the road ultimately leads. And yet he assumes that what he sees now is all there is. This is how we often experience disappointment. We mistake the limits of our current perspective for the limits of reality itself. What feels like the end may simply be a bend in the road. What feels like exclusion may be redirection. What feels like abandonment may be preparation. But while those ideas sound comforting, they do not immediately heal the wound. Because the wound of being unchosen is rarely about the event itself. It is about what the event awakens. Old memories, old insecurities, old fears, perhaps a child who tried desperately to earn approval, perhaps a teenager who felt invisible, perhaps an adult who learned to measure worth through achievement, usefulness, sacrifice, or loyalty. Many people unknowingly spend their lives trying to win a choice that was never made long ago. They become exceptional caretakers, exceptional workers, exceptional partners, not because they genuinely desire to give, but because somewhere deep inside they believe love must be earned. They believe acceptance must be purchased. They believe if they give enough, sacrifice enough, prove enough, eventually someone will finally choose them. And that belief is exhausting, because it transforms love into performance, connection into negotiation, identity into labor. You begin carrying relationships like a merchant carrying goods to market, always offering, always proving, always hoping, and secretly terrified that if you stop giving, people will stop staying. Yet the paradox is this: the more desperately we seek validation from others, the more we abandon ourselves in the process. We become experts at reading other people's needs while forgetting our own. We learn how to adapt, accommodate, and please. But we lose touch with the simple question: what do I choose? Not what do they want. Not what will make them stay. Not what will earn approval, But what is true for me? This question marks the beginning of transformation, because there comes a moment in every mature life when the search for external selection begins to lose its power. A moment when a person realizes that no amount of being chosen by others can compensate for abandoning themselves. No relationship can provide permanent self-worth. No achievement can permanently silence insecurity. No applause can permanently heal self-rejection. The world can celebrate you while you secretly feel empty. The world can reject you while you remain deeply whole. The difference lies not in what others decide, but in what you believe about yourself when they do. There is an ancient image that appears across cultures and myths. A person standing before a locked gate. For years they pound on the door, begging entry, demanding acceptance, praying to be allowed inside, only to eventually discover something astonishing. The gate was never meant to open, because their path was never on the other side. The real journey begins when they finally turn around, when they stop staring at what rejected them, when they stop worshiping closed doors, when they stop measuring their value by access denied, and when they turn around, they notice something they could not see before, an entirely different horizon, an entirely different road, an entirely different life waiting patiently behind them. How much suffering comes from refusing to turn around? How many years are lost staring at what never chose us? How many beautiful possibilities remain invisible because our eyes remain fixed on a single closed door? The deepest healing often begins not when life gives us what we wanted, but when we release the belief that our worth depends on receiving it. And that is not resignation, it is freedom, freedom from constant comparison, freedom from endless proving, freedom from the exhausting pursuit of validation. You begin understanding that your value is not determined by votes, not determined by popularity, not determined by acceptance, not determined by outcomes. A diamond remains a diamond whether it is discovered immediately or buried beneath the earth for centuries. Its nature does not change because it goes unseen. Neither does yours. The truth is that some of the most extraordinary people in history, art, science, philosophy, and human service experienced periods of being overlooked, dismissed, underestimated, or unchosen. Their greatness did not emerge because everyone recognized them. It emerged because they eventually stopped waiting for recognition to begin living fully. And perhaps that is the lesson hidden inside disappointment. Perhaps being unchosen forces us to ask a question success never would. Who am I when approval disappears? Who am I when the applause ends? Who am I when no one validates my effort? Because the answer to that question reveals the foundation of your life. And if your foundation rests entirely on being selected by others, every rejection becomes an earthquake. But if your foundation rests upon self-respect, purpose, integrity, and inner truth, rejection becomes weather. Painful, yes. Temporary, yes, but no longer powerful enough to define you. One day, if you continue growing, you may look back at the people, opportunities, and dreams that never chose you. And something unexpected will happen. The resentment will fade. The confusion will fade. Even the sadness will soften. You will begin to understand that what once felt like evidence of your inadequacy was often evidence of life's mysterious intelligence. Not every path is yours. Not every door belongs to you. Not every person is meant to walk beside you forever. And that is not a tragedy, that is wisdom, because your life was never meant to be built upon convincing others to choose you. Your life was meant to be built upon learning to choose yourself, again and again, in moments of uncertainty, in moments of loneliness, in moments of disappointment, in moments when nobody else can see your value. And perhaps the greatest revelation of all is this: the moment you stop chasing your worth through the choices of others, you become available for a different kind of life. A life where love is shared, not earned, where belonging is experienced, not negotiated, where purpose is lived, not proven. and where your deepest peace comes from knowing that even if the world overlooks you, misunderstands you, or walks away from you, you no longer walk away from yourself, because in the end, the most important choice that was ever missing was not someone else's choice of you. It was your choice of yourself, and once that choice is made, what once felt like rejection becomes revelation. What once felt like loss becomes direction. What once felt like being unchosen becomes the very path that finally leads you home. There is a unique kind of heartbreak that often remains invisible to the world. It is not the heartbreak of losing something you never truly had. It is not the disappointment of failing to try. It is something far more complex and painful. It is the experience of giving everything you possess, your time, your energy, your loyalty, your love, your patience, and still feeling unchosen. Most people know what it feels like to be rejected, but feeling unchosen is different. Rejection can happen in a moment. Feeling unchosen can linger for years. It settles quietly into the corners of the mind and becomes a question that follows you everywhere. It whispers during sleepless nights. It appears during moments of silence. It emerges unexpectedly when you watch others receive the very things you once hoped for. You remember how much you invested. You remember the sacrifices nobody saw, the extra effort, the late nights, the emotional labor, the countless moments when you chose someone else, supported someone else, believed in someone else, even when it required setting aside parts of yourself. You gave because you cared. You gave because you believed your devotion mattered. You gave because somewhere deep inside, you trusted that genuine effort would eventually be recognized. Then one day, reality presents a different outcome. Someone leaves. Someone chooses another path. An opportunity goes elsewhere. A dream slips away, and suddenly you are standing face to face with a painful contradiction. If effort matters, why wasn't it enough? If loyalty matters, why was it overlooked? If love matters, why did it not guarantee the result you hoped for? The human mind struggles with unanswered questions. We naturally search for explanations because uncertainty feels unbearable. So we begin turning inward. We examine every detail, every conversation, every decision, every flaw. We replay the past as though hidden somewhere within it lies a missing piece of evidence. Perhaps if I had been more attractive. Perhaps if I had been more successful. Perhaps if I had said the right thing. Perhaps if I had given even more. The tragedy is that these questions rarely lead to peace. Instead, they often create a deeper wound. What began as disappointment slowly transforms into self-doubt. This is where many people become trapped. They stop viewing the experience as something that happened to them and start viewing it as evidence about who they are. The event becomes an identity. Being unchosen becomes feeling unworthy. Being overlooked becomes feeling invisible. Being left behind becomes feeling inadequate. Yet these conclusions are often built upon a misunderstanding of human experience. Life is not always a reward system where effort guarantees outcomes. Human relationships are complicated. Opportunities are influenced by countless factors. Timing, circumstances, compatibility, personal struggles, and invisible forces all shape the choices people make. Still, when pain is involved, logic often loses its voice. The heart interprets what the mind cannot fully understand. And the heart often tells a painful story. It says, if I was enough, they would have stayed. It says, if I was valuable, they would have chosen me. It says, if I mattered, this would not have happened. These stories feel true because they are emotionally convincing. But emotional conviction is not the same as truth. Many people spend years carrying this hidden wound. They continue functioning, working, smiling, and moving forward. Yet beneath the surface they carry a quiet sadness. They become cautious about giving again. They become hesitant to trust again, not because they have stopped caring, but because they fear discovering once more that everything they have to offer may not be enough. And perhaps that is the deepest wound of all, not the loss itself, but the fear that your best was somehow insufficient. The fear that after giving everything from the depths of your heart, you were still left standing alone, wondering whether anyone truly saw the value of what you gave. One of the most subtle dangers of emotional pain is that it rarely remains an experience for long. Human beings have a tendency to transform events into identities. What happens to us begins to shape what we believe about ourselves. A disappointment becomes a label. A failure becomes a definition. A rejection becomes a personal truth. And before we realize it, we are no longer carrying a painful memory. We are carrying a distorted image of who we think we are. This transformation often happens quietly. A relationship ends, and the mind does not simply register the loss. Instead, it begins constructing a story. The story sounds convincing because it is built from emotion rather than evidence. It says that being left means being unlovable. It says that being overlooked means being insignificant. It says that not being chosen means not being worthy. The problem is not the event itself. The problem is the meaning we attach to it. Psychologists have long observed that human beings are meaning-making creatures. We are constantly interpreting our experiences, searching for patterns, creating narratives that help us understand the world. This ability is one of our greatest strengths. It allows us to learn, adapt, and grow. Yet it can also become a source of suffering when we mistake a temporary experience for a permanent truth. Imagine a person standing before a mirror that has been cracked. Every reflection they see appears distorted. The crack is not part of their face, yet over time they begin believing the distortion belongs to them. Emotional wounds often function in exactly the same way. The wound becomes the lens through which we see ourselves. The rejection becomes the mirror, and eventually we stop questioning the image staring back at us. What makes this process especially powerful is that the mind naturally seeks consistency. Once we adopt a belief about ourselves, we begin gathering evidence to support it. If someone secretly believes they are not worthy of love, they notice every sign of disinterest while overlooking signs of affection. If someone believes they are destined to fail, they remember every mistake while dismissing every success. The mind becomes both the prosecutor and the witness. It builds a case against the self. Over time, these internal narratives become so familiar that they no longer feel like stories. They feel like facts. This is why two people can experience the same rejection and emerge with entirely different conclusions. One person may see the event as painful but temporary. Another may see it as proof that something is fundamentally wrong with them. The difference lies not in the event itself, but in the story that follows. Many of our deepest insecurities are born in this space between what happened and what we decided it meant. A closed door becomes a verdict. A missed opportunity becomes an identity. A moment of exclusion becomes a lifelong belief. Yet life is rarely that simple. Human beings are infinitely more complex than single experiences. No relationship can fully define your worth. No career setback can capture your potential. No disappointment can summarize the entirety of your character. You are larger than any moment that wounded you. You are larger than any chapter that hurt you. The danger begins when you forget this. Because the moment you confuse an experience with an identity, you hand that experience enormous power over your future. It begins influencing your choices, your relationships, your confidence, and your ability to imagine new possibilities. The wound no longer lives in the past. It begins shaping the present. And perhaps the most important realization a person can have is that what happened to you and who you are have never been the same thing. One is an event. The other is a human life far too vast, complex, and valuable to be reduced to a single painful experience. There is a quiet exhaustion that many people carry without ever speaking about it. From the outside, they appear generous, dependable, caring, and endlessly supportive. They are the ones who remember birthdays, check on others, offer help before it is requested, and stay long after everyone else has left. They become the emotional anchors in relationships, families, friendships, and workplaces. People admire their dedication. They admire their willingness to give. What few people see, however, is the hidden burden that sometimes exists beneath such generosity. Not all giving comes from abundance. Sometimes it comes from fear. Sometimes it comes from a deep, unconscious belief that love must be earned. This belief often develops long before we recognize it. It can begin in childhood when approval feels conditional. A child learns that praise arrives when they perform well, behave correctly, achieve something impressive, or meet expectations. Gradually, they begin connecting their worth to what they provide rather than who they are. They discover that being useful feels safer than being vulnerable. As the years pass, this lesson quietly follows them into adulthood. Without realizing it, they begin approaching relationships as though affection is a transaction. Not because they are calculating, but because they are afraid. Somewhere deep inside, they fear that simply being themselves may not be enough. So they compensate, they give more, they try harder, they become indispensable. Their kindness is real. Their love is genuine, yet hidden beneath these beautiful qualities is an exhausting question. If I stop giving, will they still stay? This question can shape an entire life. It encourages people to become experts at meeting everyone else's needs while neglecting their own. They learn how to anticipate emotions, solve problems, avoid conflict, and create comfort for others. They become so skilled at caring for everyone around them that they lose touch with themselves. Their own desires become blurry. Their own boundaries become fragile. Their own needs begin to feel inconvenient. The irony is heartbreaking. The more they give to secure connection, the further they drift from the authentic self that connection is supposed to nurture. Psychologically, this pattern often creates a cycle that is difficult to escape. The person gives generously, hoping to feel valued. Others appreciate their generosity and begin relying on it. This reinforces the belief that their value comes from what they provide. As a result, they give even more. The cycle continues until exhaustion becomes impossible to ignore. Eventually, resentment begins to appear, not because they are selfish, not because they regret caring, but because somewhere inside, they hoped their sacrifices would finally produce the certainty they were seeking. They hoped someone would notice. They hoped someone would choose them. They hoped someone would say, "You no longer have to prove yourself." Yet that moment rarely arrives from the outside. No amount of external validation can permanently satisfy an insecurity that lives within. A person can receive praise and still feel unseen. They can receive affection and still feel uncertain. They can receive recognition and still feel afraid. Because the problem was never a shortage of approval alone. The problem was the belief that approval was required in order to deserve love. This realization can be unsettling. For years, a person may have built their identity around being needed. They may not know who they are outside of helping, fixing, supporting, or sacrificing. The idea of receiving without earning can feel unfamiliar. The idea of being loved without constantly proving value can feel almost impossible to trust. Yet true connection begins where performance ends. Real love does not require endless demonstrations of worth. Real belonging does not demand constant sacrifice. The healthiest relationships are not built upon transactions. They are built upon presence, honesty, and mutual respect. The moment a person begins understanding this, something profound changes. They stop measuring their value by how much they can carry for others. They stop seeing relationships as tests they must pass. And they begin discovering a truth that may have been hidden beneath years of effort. The deepest forms of love were never meant to be earned through exhaustion. They were meant to be experienced through authenticity, where being yourself is enough, and where your existence carries value long before you have given anything at all. Few experiences are more frustrating than standing before a closed door. You see what lies on the other side. You imagine the life that could exist beyond it. You invest your hopes, your energy, and your expectations into the possibility that one day it will open. You wait patiently. You work tirelessly. You convince yourself that if you are persistent enough, worthy enough, or patient enough, the barrier will eventually disappear. For a while, this belief gives you strength. It motivates you to keep moving forward. It allows you to endure uncertainty. But when the door remains closed despite everything you have done, something begins to happen inside you. Disappointment slowly turns into obsession. The door becomes more than an opportunity. It becomes a symbol. It begins to represent validation, fulfillment, belonging, or success. And because of this, losing access to it feels far more painful than the loss of the opportunity itself. Many people spend years of their lives staring at doors that never open. Not because they are weak, not because they lack intelligence, but because human beings naturally become attached to imagined futures. The mind is remarkably skilled at constructing detailed visions of how life should unfold. We picture the relationship that will finally make us happy, the career that will finally prove our worth, the opportunity that will finally justify our struggles. These imagined futures become emotional investments, and when reality moves in a different direction, it can feel as though part of us has been taken away. What we often fail to recognize is that our suffering is not always caused by the closed door itself. Much of the suffering comes from our refusal to look anywhere else. Imagine a traveler standing at a crossroads. One path is blocked. The traveler becomes so focused on removing the obstacle that they stop noticing the countless roads stretching in every other direction. Days pass, months pass, years pass. The traveler remains frozen in place, convinced that fulfillment exists only beyond the path that rejected them. This image mirrors a psychological reality that affects many lives. When we become emotionally attached to one outcome, we often lose sight of alternative possibilities. Our attention narrows, our perspective shrinks. We begin treating one opportunity as though it were the only opportunity. Yet life rarely operates according to such limited logic. History is filled with stories of people whose greatest blessings emerged from unexpected directions. The job they desperately wanted never arrived, but another path revealed talents they never knew existed. The relationship they mourned eventually made room for a connection that aligned more deeply with who they truly were. The dream that collapsed forced them to discover a purpose that had been hidden beneath their original ambitions. At the time, none of these developments felt fortunate. At the time, they felt like losses. This is one of the most difficult truths about personal growth. Transformation often disguises itself as disappointment. Life rarely announces that it is redirecting you. It usually feels like rejection first. It feels like confusion. It feels like uncertainty. It feels like standing in darkness without understanding why the familiar path has disappeared. The challenge is that human beings crave certainty. We want guarantees. We want explanations. We want immediate evidence that our suffering serves a purpose. But growth often requires walking forward without those assurances. The closed door teaches patience. The closed door teaches humility. The closed door forces us to confront our attachments. Most importantly, it invites us to ask a powerful question. What if the life I am meant to live cannot be reached through the path I refuse to release? That question changes everything. Because the moment you stop treating one closed door as the center of your existence, your vision begins to expand. You start noticing opportunities that were invisible before. You start seeing possibilities that could never emerge while all of your attention remained fixed on what was unavailable. And sometimes, years later, You look back at the door that once consumed your thoughts and realize something astonishing. What felt like a barrier was also a turning point. What felt like rejection was also direction. What felt like an ending was quietly guiding you toward a horizon you could not yet see. A horizon that only became visible when you finally found the courage to turn around and keep walking. There comes a moment in many people's lives when they begin to realize how much of their emotional world has been controlled by the opinions of others. It is rarely an instant revelation. More often it arrives slowly through repeated disappointments, unmet expectations, and the exhausting realization that no amount of approval ever seems to bring lasting peace. At first, validation feels harmless. We all want to be appreciated. We all want to feel seen. We all want to know that our efforts matter. These desires are deeply human. They connect us to one another and help create a sense of belonging. The problem begins when validation stops being something we enjoy and becomes something we depend upon. The difference between those two states is enormous. When validation is appreciated, it enriches life. When validation is required, it controls life. Many people unknowingly spend years chasing approval without recognizing how much power they have given away. They adjust their behavior to avoid criticism. They silence parts of themselves to gain acceptance. They pursue goals that impress others rather than goals that genuinely fulfill them. Slowly, their identity becomes shaped by external reactions. The danger of this pattern is subtle. At first, it appears successful. You receive compliments, you earn recognition. You gain approval, others admire your choices. But beneath these rewards lies a hidden vulnerability. If your confidence depends on praise, then criticism becomes devastating. If your worth depends on acceptance, then rejection becomes unbearable. If your identity depends on external validation, then every opinion becomes a threat. You find yourself constantly monitoring how you are perceived. You become preoccupied with whether people approve, whether they agree, whether they are impressed. Instead of living your life, you begin managing your image of life. This creates a kind of psychological prison. The walls are invisible, but they are powerful. You hesitate before speaking honestly. You hesitate before pursuing unconventional dreams. You hesitate before setting necessary boundaries. Not because these actions are wrong, but because they risk disapproval. And so a strange contradiction emerges. The very thing that promises belonging begins limiting freedom. The very thing that promises security begins creating anxiety. The very thing that promises confidence begins producing fear. Over time, this pursuit becomes exhausting because approval is inherently unstable. People's opinions change. Expectations shift. What earns admiration today may invite criticism tomorrow. If your sense of self is built upon something so unpredictable, emotional stability becomes almost impossible. This is why many individuals eventually reach a breaking point, not a dramatic collapse, but a quiet awakening. They begin asking questions they have avoided for years. Who am I when nobody is applauding? Who am I when nobody is watching? Who am I when external validation disappears? These questions can feel uncomfortable because they strip away familiar sources of reassurance. Yet they also open the door to something extraordinary. They open the door to freedom. True freedom does not mean becoming indifferent to others. It does not mean rejecting connection or refusing feedback. Human beings will always value relationships and community. Freedom means no longer allowing external opinions to determine your fundamental sense of worth. It means understanding that praise can be welcomed without becoming necessary. It means understanding that criticism can be considered without becoming defining. It means understanding that your value exists before anyone recognizes it. This realization changes the way you move through the world. You become more authentic because you no longer need to perform constantly. You become more courageous because failure no longer threatens your identity. You become more peaceful because your self-respect is no longer dependent upon circumstances beyond your control. Perhaps the greatest gift of all is that life becomes lighter. The endless need to prove yourself begins fading. The constant comparison begins losing its grip. The exhausting search for universal approval begins dissolving. And in that space, something remarkable emerges, a quieter, steadier confidence rooted not in how the world sees you, but in how deeply you know yourself. That confidence cannot be granted by applause, and it cannot be taken away by silence. It grows from within, becoming a source of freedom that no external validation could ever provide. Perhaps one of the most transformative moments in a human life is not the moment when someone else chooses you, but the moment when you finally choose yourself. At first, this idea can sound simple, even obvious. Most people assume they already value themselves. Most people believe they are living according to their own choices. Yet if we look honestly at our lives, many of us discover that we have spent years waiting for permission to become who we already are. We wait for acceptance before expressing our truth. We wait for recognition before trusting our abilities. We wait for love before believing we are worthy of it. We wait for someone else to confirm what we should have learned to confirm within ourselves. The tragedy is not that people seek encouragement. Encouragement is beautiful. Support matters. Relationships matter. Human beings are not meant to live in isolation. The tragedy is that many people postpone their own lives while waiting for external approval to arrive. They tell themselves that confidence will come after success, that peace will come after validation, that happiness will come after they are finally seen, chosen, appreciated, or understood. But years pass and the feeling they are waiting for never fully arrives, because self-worth built upon external conditions remains fragile. Every achievement creates a new expectation. Every accomplishment creates a new standard. Every victory creates a new fear of losing what has been gained. The cycle never ends. This is why choosing yourself is such a profound act. It breaks the cycle. It is the moment you stop treating your value as something that must be earned and begin recognizing it as something that already exists. This does not mean becoming arrogant. It does not mean believing you are superior to others. True self-acceptance has nothing to do with superiority. It is simply the willingness to stand beside yourself, rather than constantly standing against yourself. Many people live as their own harshest critic. They forgive others more easily than they forgive themselves. They offer compassion to friends while withholding it from their own hearts. They understand the imperfections of everyone around them except their own. As a result, they spend years fighting an invisible battle within. No matter what they achieve, an internal voice continues whispering that they are not enough. Choosing yourself means refusing to let that voice become the ultimate authority. It means recognizing that growth and self-respect can exist together. You can acknowledge your flaws without defining yourself by them. You can pursue improvement without believing you are fundamentally inadequate. You can strive for more while appreciating who you already are. This shift changes everything. When you choose yourself, you stop abandoning your needs to gain approval. You stop betraying your values to avoid rejection. You stop shrinking your identity to fit spaces that were never designed for you. Instead, you begin building a life that reflects your deepest truths. You become more honest, more grounded, more aligned with your authentic nature. This does not make life easier in every way. In fact, choosing yourself sometimes requires difficult decisions. It may require walking away from environments that diminish your spirit. It may require setting boundaries that disappoint others. It may require releasing relationships built upon versions of yourself that no longer exist. These choices can feel uncomfortable because they challenge familiar patterns. Yet discomfort is often the price of authenticity. The alternative is far more costly. The alternative is spending decades disconnected from yourself, while trying to satisfy expectations that were never truly yours. There is a remarkable peace that emerges when a person finally stops chasing worth and starts living from it. They no longer see themselves as a project that needs constant fixing. They no longer approach life as a test they must pass to deserve belonging. Instead, they begin moving through the world with a quieter confidence, not because every doubt has disappeared, not because every fear has been conquered, but because they have made a decision to remain loyal to themselves even when circumstances are uncertain, a decision to honor their own humanity even when others fail to understand it, a decision to trust their own inner voice even when the world grows loud. And perhaps that is the deepest form of freedom a person can experience. Not freedom from struggle, not freedom from disappointment, but freedom from the exhausting belief that your existence requires constant justification. The moment you truly choose yourself, something extraordinary happens. The search that once consumed so much of your energy begins to fade. You stop looking everywhere for proof that you matter because you have finally become the source of that proof. And in that realization, what once felt like a lifelong journey toward acceptance reveals itself as a journey home to the person who was waiting for your loyalty all along.